Hello, everybody. My name is Danny, and today we're doing the political commentary at the month. Very late, as usual. There you go. So today we're going to talk about anarchy. What does it really entail? What is it really about? And how does it really define truly? So we're going to talk about that today. But to start, we're actually going to start off by using it as a basis. A video released on the 26th of December of 2021 by Russell Brand. Is democracy just enslavement with benefits? I thought that this perfectly triggered me in not in a bad way, but in a good way to want to talk about this. So let's finally give a proper breakdown. Let's get to it.
Have you been tricked and lured into an unendurable trap? Is the system you live within impossible of changing? Will it always return to forms of tyranny? Do you want to hear an actual alternative version of reality that we could all create together? Well, I've got one for you. Hello there, you 4.5 million wonders. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. Do you know, a lot of the time people will say in the comments below, which I read, and I love reading because I want to stay connected to you, well, what would you do, Russell? What alternative systems are there? That's why on my podcast, Under the Skin, I frequently talk to people that have experience with alternative visions, philosophies, ideals, ideas, academic experience, personal experience from across the world, throughout history, various different systems and ideologies that could be deployed to change our reality. Notably, particularly, and in this instance, anarchism, which I spoke about at length with Ruth Kinner on Under the Skin. In this part of the conversation, Ruth Kinner explains why anarchism was dismissed at the point of its inception, how it lost the duel with communism and Marxism to be the dominant philosophy of the Russian Revolution, and how many of the ideas in anarchism, which is simply, really, democracy, autonomy, and self-rule by people for the people without centralized systems of power continually dominating us, has been obscured as a potential solution precisely because it could work. Stay to the end of this conversation and let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you up for real change? Do you want real change? Is this something you're willing to sacrifice for and work for? All of this is stuff that I need to know from you. Hey, by the way, did you know I'm appearing live across the UK from January to May next year? There's a link in the description if you want to come see me. Stay to the end of this video and let me know what you're thinking in the comments. I always read them.
The anarchist tradition that you're interested in is not necessarily abolitionist. It's not like smash the state, get rid of a national identity, get rid of all religion. These constructs are, by their nature, monopolising and tyrannical. That's not your position. It's just you inhabit those institutions differently, or do you think there is some need for abolition?
So I haven't got an objection to people saying smash the state, but I think when you think about what that means and you accept that you're living within states, then you have to unpack what that smashing entails, because the states, you know, it's a huge and an abstract concept. So we have to sort of try and break it down. If you don't like the idea of the state, tell me what it is you don't like about it. Is it the fact that it empowers some people to tell you what to do and how to do it and when to do it?
That is a bit of it.
Exactly. So it's about the kind of social relations that we enjoy or we don't enjoy, because relationships are structured in particular ways, and we associate that with the state or with statism or with authority. So if we think about it in terms of the social relationships, then we can start thinking about, well, okay, so if you want to smash the state, how do you do it? Well, you change the kinds of social relations you have. And we can think about that, you know, quite practically in any kind of institution that we inhabit. We can think about it in a university. We can think about it in any workplace. We can think about it in a school. We can think about it in a nursery. We can think about it anywhere, such that we're always trying to combat the concentration of power that allows someone else to command, boss, and dictate what somebody else should do.
Wow. Concentration of power. So say like that we were I know of some anarchist organisations that probably wouldn't even declare themselves as such. Primarily, I'm speaking about some 12-step organisations that have creeds such as each group is fully autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or our organisation as a whole. Leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. Leadership positions are temporarily hold, all democratically elected and terminable, like a 3 months, 6 months, a year, then that person's jogged on. So, but why, like, there's loads of questions, but one is, why has anarchy had such bad PR? Why is there no iconic, heroic figure of anarchy that's like, this is the anarchy woman or man, and where has it been successful, and can you talk us through an example of how it might work in a sort of a reasonable and visible example?
Okay, so we'll start with the negative.
Yeah.
It's difficult to work out exactly why public opinion is so hostile, but it's always been the case. So right from the point when anarchists started to organise and call themselves anarchists, so we're talking from the 1840s to the 1870s, they attracted a bad press. And I think it's partly because of the ways in which anarchists expressed their critique. So they were talking primarily, I suppose, not to the old autocrats or the aristocrats or the sort of the old landed. I mean, they didn't like that either, but the people that they most upset were those that they had something in common with. And they were talking really to Republicans and liberals who they accused of failing to deliver on revolutionary goals. So the standard kind of historic goals of equality, liberty and fraternity. And what they were saying was that, if you're serious about those goals, then you can't organise in the way that you're organising. You can't defend the constitutions that you've set up. Because fundamentally what those constitutions do is structure inequality and bring enmity between people by protecting the right to private property. And for as long as you do that, and for as long as you use the law to uphold that relationship, you're forever going to have masters and slaves. And you can tell me, as a liberal or a Republican, that you've abolished slavery, that you abhor that kind of relationship, but actually what you've done in your constitution is that you've formally abolished the ownership of people, but you've now put most people in a relationship of enslavement by forcing them to work for others on the owner's terms. So that's a pretty devastating critique, because it suggests that everything that the liberal or the Republican state defends in terms of rights, democracy, at that time there wasn't any democracy, but certainly in terms of rights, was a fiction. And not only that, compared to other socialists, the anarchists refused to contemplate entering into these systems in order to change them, because they believed that the systems themselves were inevitably corrupting. So unlike social democrats, unlike other socialists, and certainly some of the socialist currents that come from, they're informed by Marxism, they refused to think in terms of organising political parties, and they always advocated direct action. And as soon as you put yourself outside of the systems and you say, one, I'm going to fight your systems because I think they're wrong, two, I'm going to expose the values that you hold dear as being false, and three, and I'm going to fight you by methods that you don't approve of, it's perhaps not surprising that anarchists get a bad name. They look like they're irrational. They look like it's easy to demonise them as irrational. They look like they're outlaws. They look like they just want to destroy. And that's how they're portrayed, even before anarchists do anything that's remotely controversial. And there are controversial things that anarchists do historically, but even before any of this happens, anarchists are being demonised as outlaws and criminals and people who need to be dealt with repressive force.
It's interesting how many norms are called into question by even the basic tenets that you have introduced and seemingly polar philosophies or ideals such as liberalism, republicanism, conservatism, socialism, capitalism, Marxism are rendered as being part of a quite limited attitude and quite a materialistic and commodifying attitude towards, I don't know, people and resources. It's so it's not surprising. But why do you think that there is? I know there are sort of key figures in anarchy, but do you think it's because of this reluctance to participate in existing institutions and systems that it's difficult to establish a narrative and icons?
I think the other thing that makes it difficult to establish icons in the anarchist movement is that anarchists themselves don't really like leaders. So,
right.
You know, one of the things that anarchists like is leaderfulness, the idea that we all have capacity and that no one can speak in our name, and that, you know, there's no if you're denying a single source of authority as being legitimate in the state, then you can hardly sort of start constructing this in your own organisation. So, although anarchists certainly refer to a lot of key thinkers and movements and events, they tend not to say, this is the book that you should read if you're going to find out about anarchism. There's no equivalent of the Communist Manifesto. There's no equivalent of Das Kapital. There's no equivalent of, I don't know, J.S. Mill's On Liberty. There are just endless discussions and texts and exchanges. So it's difficult to point to single figures.
Because it's antithetical to one of the central ideas.
That's right, because that's right. But I mean, and the other thing that's, I suppose, interesting about the anarchists is that those who did become respectable, if you like, tended to become respectable in ways that detached them, at least in the public mind, from their anarchism. So it's not well known, for example, that Leo Tolstoy was associated with the anarchist movement, and that his work is thought of as being Christian anarchist.
Cool. Well, do you agree with me? Do you have enough hope in you, enough faith to work for something like anarchism? Would you like to take over your schools, hospitals, communities, run things differently? Should the people that work and use facilities run them? Do you see the way the world is being hollowed out? Every high street a hollow imitation of reality now? Can you see it happening? Let me know in the comments. Give this video a like, please.
So, off the bat, and I said this in my comment on it too, off the bat I can say that this is not at all about anarchy, because if it was, it would be by its definition, and its original definition is a world without rule, governance, or authority. So that would literally mean no government, no laws, no rules, no boundaries or limitations, no politics or anything at all, pretty much. It would literally be true infinite freedom. And that is a true fact. Like, that is the original definition, specifically, is a world without rule, governance, or authority. That is the original definition of anarchy. And therefore, an anarchist, by its original definition, would be somebody who advocates for that, wants that, rallies for that, pushes for it, all of that. So basically, the abolishment of governance, the abolishment of government, the abolishment of rule, as in rules and laws, the abolishment of authority, as in anybody who, or anything, any organization that dares say that they somehow have it right, and that you have to follow their standards. What they personally believe is the logical, sensible, right thing to do. Right way to live your life. Right choices to make. So in other words, you literally, everybody for themselves. Everybody gets to live their own lives and lead them how they want to. They get to do what they want when they want, and nobody can fucking say otherwise. And at my heart, and at my core, I am absolutely an anarchist. Like, yes, I absolutely can talk about politics, and I absolutely do have my own political understanding, my own political beliefs, philosophies, ideologies, perceptions, understandings, all this stuff. I absolutely do. That's why I do the political commentaries. But at my heart, I am a true anarchist, as in, I don't want anything political. I don't want anything government. I don't want anything authority. I don't want anything rules. And she effectively touched on that. Ruth effectively touched on that in this video, because she basically noted that it's antithetical, is the term they used. It's against the core value of a true to original definition anarchist, where effectively you're against all and every possible form of authority, of command structure, of dictation. Basically, you're against structure, actually, is really what it is. Because structure, people don't realize this, and it's such a human thing to... It's actually interesting. The newest, most recent Matrix movie, which I watched on Christmas Day, or Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, the evening of Christmas, with my family and some friends at my sister's place for Christmas. And to end off the day, we ended up watching Matrix Resurrections, so the newest Matrix video, or movie. And near the very end, Neil Patrick Harris's character had a line that immediately made me jump up, look for my mom, point to her, and say, "This is what I've been saying for years about human beings." What he just described is exactly my fucking biggest issue with human beings. In other words, it's literally another way to say that they're obsessed and addicted to structure. They have to have all this material familiarity. They have to have all these fucking limits and all these fucking boundaries. They have to be controlled by somebody else, by rules, by laws that some random person in history decided this makes sense, and everybody else just went along with it because apparently they thought for themselves. Apparently that's how that works. If you think for yourself and make up your own mind, you just go along with what somebody else decided for you way back when, and nobody knows who the fuck it was, usually, with whatever it is in life. Different story that goes into existentialism, but the point is, it's true. It's the God's honest truth. It's obvious, And human beings, because of the way the human mind is built, it's built to work off of familiarity, but specifically, it's physical and material familiarity. So what I call the familiarity factor. Basically, if the human brain does not have something physical and material to familiarize itself with, it automatically is incapable of even beginning to form an understanding of it and comprehend it. And therefore, what it does, the brain instantly throws it out as impossible, and it just dismisses it. It won't touch it because of the fact that it knows it's going to go into a crisis, and it's going to literally lose. It could even send you into a fucking full-on mental, emotional, psychotic break if you force it to have to face it. Because all it knows is its cage, its voluntary prison that it's built to function within. That prison, that cage, is all those fucking endless amounts of limitations and boundaries, controls, that keep you feeling like you're not in chaos as an anarchy, but you're under control. But really, you're not controlling yourself, you're letting other people control you. That's the truth of how that works. And so anarchy is basically acknowledging that and saying, fuck all of that. Throw that out the window. Burn it in fire. Burn your human nature in fire. Say fuck your mind, fuck everybody else, let's go and fucking actually live freely, and acknowledge that that's a bunch of fucking bullshit. Let's throw it away, burn it in fire, kill it, never let it come back, and let's just fucking live to fucking live. Live to fucking enjoy ourselves without worrying about anything, without thinking about anything, without letting ourselves have anxiety, without, being like, oh, we can't do this because there's some rule that says we can't, or there's a social stigma that says that's immoral, or that's bad, or you shouldn't do that. If anything, you should do that. Exactly because society says you shouldn't. Means it's actually probably a good thing to do, because it's going to challenge them and put them in way outside their comfort zone and say, look, the world didn't end, you didn't die, nobody died, nobody got hurt. So fuck you and your fucking rules and your boundaries, your limitations, your controls, because they're bullshit. There's like a lot of beauty to anarchy, in my opinion. But again, I have this massive issue with this kind of stuff, because there's a lot of people out there, and she was saying, when anarchy first got dubbed and coined themselves as anarchists, back in 1840s, 1870s, that's not true. the original definition, the original use for anarchism and anarchy comes from way before that. Literally before government ever became a thing, religion ever became a thing, which is just another form of government. That's a fact. Before that kind of authority of any kind of hierarchical systems ever became a concept and a thing for human beings, before all of that, the world literally operated in true anarchy. There wasn't any rules. There wasn't any authorities. There wasn't any governments. There wasn't any laws. There wasn't any boundaries or limits. It was just fuck around and find out. Literally, fuck around and find out. That was how everybody and everything had to live. And they did. And that's how they made so many fucking discoveries. That's how people learned. By fucking around and finding out if they fucked up by doing it or not. Find out if they hurt themselves or got killed or somebody else did. You learn from those lessons because you literally intentionally knew you were going to potentially faceplant. You're going to potentially blow off a limb. Now you have to figure out what the fuck you did wrong or what the fuck was wrong about it and learn from it. Or maybe try it again later once you have new further knowledge and observance under your skin, or under your skin, under your arm, so to speak, and work with that. Just basically go like, okay, let's try this instead. Let's try a completely different way of tackling that and trying it, basically, doing this same thing again. Let's do it in a completely different way, from a different angle, with this new knowledge and this new observances cataloged in my head, and let's go try it again. In this way now, which is totally different than the first way I tried it. And maybe you keep doing it until maybe you finally figure out it is possible. It's just you had to keep fucking up and fucking yourself over until you finally figured out whatever it was, whatever way you're supposed to go at it, that enables you to do whatever it is that it is, without anybody getting hurt or dying for it. Like, that's how you learn. That's how everybody learned way back when. So the first people of the world, they literally operated in anarchy, and that's a beautiful thing. And it showed that because you had no rules, no laws, no structures. That wasn't even really a concept yet. There was no concept of hierarchy or anything like that. And so people just kind of figured shit out on their own. They fucked around and found out, because they had true ultimate freedom, which is anarchy. So my problem is drawn from that kind of concept, where people are like, oh, 1940, in other words, it's political. They're aligning it with politics. Literally, by definition, a world without rule, governance, or authority proves it cannot be political. It's literally anti-politic. It's anti-government. It's anti-authority. It's anti-all of that. It's anti-rules. It's anti-laws. It's anti-limits. It's anti-boundaries. It's literally, by definition, it is the exact opposite. It is the anti. Insert all of it here. It's the apolitical. It is the a-governmental. It is the a-authoritarian. It is without. That is what true anarchy, by definition, is. Yes, there is 8 other definitions last I checked, although this was like 2019, 2020. There's 8 other definitions of anarchy now, which and literally the original definition by world without rule, governance, or authority was at the rock bottom then. I believe it was 2019, but it was at the rock bottom then of the definitions, as in ninth, as in the least fucking used and the least known definition of it, which I find to be very fucked up. It's a completely different topic for a different day, and I kind of wanted to rant about this for a long time too, but I fucking hate how people deal with the fucking language. They're like, oh, yeah, it's called the evolution of language, it's called change. Obviously you're anti-change if you don't just accept that, we keep changing the definitions and the uses of these words. No, you're ignoring it. You throw out, I'm going to go on this anyway. You're throwing out the basic fucking principle and rule of all language, which is called using fucking your brain, using common sense, and being like, actually, that makes no sense. You know why? How did we get words? New words. Right, it's because of the fact you didn't have a word, and thus you didn't have a definition for whatever it is you're trying to express. So what do? You invent a new word, and then apply the definition, whatever it is you're trying to express and convey with that word, to that word. You don't apply it to a pre-existing word. every word's supposed to have a single use and a single definition always, throughout the entirety of the life of a language, because it's common sense. So it prevents confusion, so everybody throughout eras understands what the fuck this word means and defines as. Way back when, somebody threw that out the window, and especially now more than ever, everybody's obsessed with doing that now. Of having it completely abolished and be like, nah, we just want to make ourselves more confused and get more divided because we want to piss each other off and piss ourselves off by demanding that you have to mean this because nobody fucking uses the word this way anymore. And it's like, it's infuriating, which is why I'm mass majority, like at least 80% prescriptivist. Prescriptivist and prescriptivism is people who want to stick to a particular rule set with a language. They do not want to adapt, they want to keep it as it was. Because it's, in this case, to us, to me, common sense. With that out of the way, all 8 other definitions of anarchy do not exist. They should not exist because it violates that exact prescriptivism mindset and rule that I have. And that the language common sense has. Which is, you never, ever, 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 for any reason, add a new definition or change the definition and use of a pre-existing word. You have to invent a new word mandatorily for that every fucking time. It's so infuriating for me. Anyway, so all 8 of the other definitions, other than the original, which is a world without rule, governance, authority, should not exist, and therefore to me do not exist. You cannot say that those are real, because they can't be. You have to have a new word for that. That's just a fact to me. Different story. So yes, that's one of the things that irritates me about that, but the main thing that irritates me about it, I've been trying to get to forever, is the point that ultimately people keep associating with politics, even though it's anti-politic. So basically, what they do is they're like, "Oh, I'm an anarcho-syndicalist. I'm an ANCAP, anarcho-capitalist. I'm an anarcho this, that, the other thing. Anarcho-socialist, anarcho-communist, There's no such thing. You can't, like, literally, you're defying the original use and definition of the fucking word. What it really means. A world without rule, governance, authority. You're literally throwing it out the window, ignoring it completely, and saying, yeah, but I choose to say that definition isn't real. It doesn't exist. Because, well, it's on the bottom of the definitions, and therefore nobody really uses it, so it doesn't exist. No. But my interpretation does, and it's the only one that's valid, so anarcho-syndicalist here. And it's like, I fucking hate that. What's his face? Greenwald. What is his first name? I can't remember right now. But Russell had him on a video recently as well, within the last week. I watched that, and they were talking about, I think, I mentioned like anarcho-syndicalist or ANCAP or something like that. I think they might have mentioned both. And that immediately was like, that was also off the bat. I was just like, that's not our thing. It cannot exist. It's impossible to exist because of the fact that it's literally in direct contradiction to what the actual real definition of anarchy is. So you cannot be an anarchist, but also politically involved. That does not work. You cannot be for a political ideology and system, as in governance, while also claiming you're an anarchist. It's literally impossible. They are in direct contradiction to each other. They're direct opposition to each other. They hate each other because of the fact that one is trying to get rid of the other. Anarchy is to get rid of the government, the politics. That's what it's to abolish. That's literally what anarchy is. It's to aggressively defy. And basically, hopefully, the idea is to permanently murder and never allow to come back any form of rule, governance, or authority. So anything political or government. You just don't let it come back. It's to kill it off. So you literally cannot be both politically believing and involved and trying to get a political system in place, as in government, while also being an anarchist. It's literally impossible. So to claim you're an ANCAP or you're an AN-syndicalist or whatever else is horseshit. It is literally to lie to yourself. It is to be voluntarily delusional, as in like a schizophrenic. You're choosing to be deluded and pretend that a false reality is real when it obviously isn't. It's a fiction. So, like, That's one thing that really bugs me about that. Now, obviously, when it comes down to anarchy, as much as I would love to believe it would be possible to implement it and get it finally to be in place, worldwide for that matter, but also to then at the same time be able to maintain it without anybody suddenly getting power hungry, deciding to get all corrupted and say, well, no, we need authority and all this stuff, and rebuild that. The same fucking thing and do the same shit we've done throughout our history since government and politics became a thing. You know, like, as much as I'd want to believe that's possible, everything about human beings tells me it's impossible. It would never, ever, ever happen. It wouldn't even begin to implement anarchy. And even if they did, it would be, likely it is, unintended. It would be accidental. It would be a collapse of a nation and a government. And then everybody bickering, squabbling about what's the right political philosophy and ideology to have. What's the right system to have? What were really the real issues here? And then they just get into probably actually wars with each other. And so you technically be living in anarchy, and it would actually be their own perceived definition of anarchy, which is a war without rule, governance, or authority. And or sorry, not that. That's the real definition. Sorry, the society's definition rather is it would actually be that, which is chaos, bloodshed, murder, war, theft, rape. All this whole, you know, everything that's the worst fucking crimes in the world is exactly what would happen. That's society's perception of what anarchy is and means. That's the number one definition in dictionaries. That's most heavily used and understood because society, and thus, go figure, politics and thus governance and authority figures throughout history have always been anti-anarchist because it's literally would take away all of their power and control over us. It would literally ruin their entire lives, all their system, their entire schemes. It would literally throw it all out, murder it, burn it in fire, and it would also target them specifically and probably deal with them admittedly in a vigilante way to make sure they can never, ever, ever re-usurp authority and control again and re-implement their systems. Because you know they do that in a heartbeat. So at that point, what you would do is there'd probably be a group of people, I would never be a part of it, but there would be a group of people that would go out and probably literally slaughter these people in cold blood. They would literally headhunt and make sure they died in order so that they could never come back again to where they were and reset the thing back. The problem is human beings are human beings, so likely it is inevitability, unfortunately, that it's going to happen anyway. They're going to auto-corrupt. There's going to be power mongers. And they're going to go and they're going to suddenly start to usurping control and authority again. They're going to build their groups and their support. And next thing you know, they're going to try to form nations and everything again. And they're just going to redo everything that's on throughout our history, which has never fucking worked. It's always hurt the common person throughout our entire history. It's always hurt the common person. So they're just bound to repeat. And if you look at throughout human history, and especially now more than ever, human beings are obsessed with cycling, as in looping. They love to just go in the fucking same perpetual loop. There's only one loop they go through, and they loop, 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 and they just demand that that's how it has to be, because it makes perfect sense. Because see, once they reach the bottom of the loop, they have to start going up towards the top half of the loop. And if they go from the bottom to the top apex of a loop, what do human beings define that as? Well, look, see, we're making progress. We're progressing, we're progressive. And then as soon as they get to the top, they have to come back down again to the bottom. And so that's considered regressing. And so they go and they look and they point at all these evil people that are politically opposite of them, blame them for the problem. Everybody's pointing fingers at each other because everybody's a fucking child in an adult's body. And they go and they do that, and then that's the cycle. That's literally it. That's the entire fucking loop. And they just go... That's human beings. That's how this shit works. That's what Karl Marx's point was. That's literally why he had written, and created the Communist and Socialist manifestos, and thus also created the terms communist and socialist. Because in reality, Karl Marx was entirely apolitical. His entire point for why he had to do that was because those two specific political philosophies and ideologies had never existed in regards to terms for them, so titles, and manifestos. So basically a book that clearly outlines what those ideologies, those beliefs, that philosophy stands for, that regime stands for, what it entails. Neither of those existed at any point in history. Yet those two political ideologies absolutely had existed and had been consistent throughout world history since government became a thing. So, if they didn't have the name, they didn't have names and they didn't have a defining book, a manifesto, then how could he produce and output the entire point for what he was doing in research, which was the political cycle of the world? He couldn't, because people would be like, well, you're missing two things. And it's like, yeah, I know, because they didn't have names or definitions, they didn't have manifestos, and I figured, why would I make those? But instead, he went the opposite direction. He's like, of course I have to make those, because he understood that people needed this in order to, and he needed it in order to complete his cycle of the world, political cycle of the world. So he created names for them. The names are literally self-explanatory for what they really represent, what the real manifestos say that the ideologies actually represent. And from there, what happens is, he had to therefore write the manifestos out for them as well, so that people understood what they entailed. From there, what ends up happening is he ended up creating the names, writing out the manifestos, and then from there, obviously, he could finally complete the political cycle of the world, which was, again, the entire point for why he was doing what he was doing. It was literally a attempt at a desperate grasping of hope that maybe it might just wake up his fellow human beings, the rest of humanity, or at least some people around the world, to realize, God, we're fucking idiots. We're stupid. Like, why are we willingly just going and repeating the same loop over and over? Why don't, we could actually change something. That was his desperate grabbing of hope. That's what would happen, even though he understood, especially with that research, that human beings love their loops. They love their structure. As in, they're just going to be bound to always repeat the same thing over and over and over again, just basically rebranding it, giving it a new title every time they loop. So they could fool themselves into believing it's really different when it never was. But he still desperately grasped that hope, so that's why he did the political cycle of the world, which is the start of a nation is communism, then it goes to socialism, obviously capitalism, oligarchy, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, or dictatorship, and then totalitarianism. And totalitarianism is the collapse of a state, as in the collapse of a nation. So the start of a nation is communism, the collapse is totalitarianism. So that's the political cycle of the world. That's what his entire point was. If those already had titles, they already had manifestos, he would have created those. He wouldn't have had to create them. He would have already had them, and he would have finished that and output it literally years and years and years before he actually ended up doing it. It was because of that he got so delayed. And he didn't necessarily expect that to happen, and he wasn't intending on having to do something with that, but he did. And so he committed to it and he did it. And then, of course, as he got older and after he released that publicly, he realized it did nothing. In fact, if anything, people laughed at it, said he was insane or out of his mind or whatever else. They extrapolated from it. They assumed shit. They manipulated it. They did whatever they could to twist and contort it. And the few people who took it seriously still didn't really do anything with it. They're like, okay, sure. But they didn't change anything, and they didn't necessarily want to change. They're just like, okay, yeah, I acknowledge this is true. And then that was basically it, and they just went on with their lives. And that made him even more pessimistic about people, and especially about politics. He was already entirely apolitical. But then by that point, he became even more intensely apolitical, and by the time he died, he was the most apolitical he was in his entire life, and probably more misanthropic than he was his entire life. Because his desperate grab of hope, knowing it was desperate, and that it likely would never work how he'd hoped it would. The desperate grab of hope, that was the hope he was grabbing onto desperately. He knew it would probably never work, and he was right. And so he basically went out of life the most probably frustrated, pessimistic, and misanthropic he could have possibly been, and that's apolitical. They know for a fact he was the most apolitical he was in his entire life, and he pretty much was entirely apolitical his whole life. But especially by the time he died, they know he was by far the most apolitical he had ever been, and it makes perfect sense because of everything he did and spending all that time to point out how pointless politics is and how pointless that it is that people are so fucking stupid that they're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over. They're going to be so obsessed with their structures, their boundaries, their limitations, their loops, their controls, that they're just going to keep looping into perpetuity, and they will never want to change that. And inevitably, unfortunately, that only helped improve that reality, right? You know, rather than proving that hope isn't necessarily worthless and you can change things. It didn't change anything. And, you know, so now there's people out here, they're like, oh, yes, I'm socialist. Oh, yes, I'm communist. And it's like, no, you're not. You're absolutely not. And you're literally being the opposite of everything he pointed out that true socialism and communism would represent. What's worse is, throughout history, the communist and socialist manifestos had been manipulated and manipulated again and edited again. And they keep taking more and more out, and then they keep putting in stuff that wasn't ever there, and they keep changing certain things so that it matches what they want, that is, the people in power, they want people to believe it stands for, which is actually authoritarianism, dictatorship, totalitarianism on his political spectrum, or his political cycle of the world chart. So, literally, they're just taking that, and they're redefining and rebranding, rebadging, retitling what authoritarianism, dictatorship, and totalitarianism really are and represent, as in fascism. And that's exactly what Joseph Stalin wanted. It's literally because of Joseph Stalin that the world, the society at large, the average people, started to actually look at them, USSR, and believe that that's what they really stood for. And he understood that people were stupid enough that they'd be convinced of something that makes no sense, that's actually contradictory, which is that it's like, oh yes, Nazi Germany's fascist, but the USSR isn't fascist. No, they're a communist dictatorship is what it ended up becoming. Even though literally it's in their acronym, because it's in their name, the United Socialist States of Russia, they claim to be socialist, and that's also why, because Joseph Stalin fully understood he was a totalitarian dictator, and that he was going to keep getting more and more totalitarian than he already was. That was his entire intent. He fully understood basic human psychology enough to know that if he claimed and made the official title and everything to be socialist and kept saying they were socialist, that it would create this ultra negative perception that would prevent people for the rest of human history from ever trusting anybody or anything that would ever claim to be socialist. Because they'd always immediately think of them and him. Joseph Stalin, the USSR. Inevitably. And guess what? As you can tell, he was spot on. He got exactly what he wanted out of it. And the reason why is because he himself was fully fucking capitalist. He was just very totalitarian with his capitalism. He capitalized on opportunities that were something that a dictator or totalitarian dictator would adhere to, because that's exactly what he was. And he knew he was that. That was his entire point. He saw a certain nation was weak, he'd go and annex it. He saw that Germany was overextending themselves. That was when he'd start to go and give the onslaught of quantity over quality. And just go into a full-on aggressive attack. Because of the fact he understood that they expended themselves as winter, it was advantageous. He seized the opportunity. That's called being a capitalist at his base form. So he was absolutely a capitalist. Plus, his entire point was he wanted to, of course, be able to accumulate as much wealth personally as he could. You know, and make certain things look stately, at least for them, as if it, make it look like they were prospering when they weren't, because ultimately, you know, the idea was, let's build all these new tenements, let's build all these new buildings. The reason why is because it makes it look like, oh, well, you must have a lot of money now, right? You must have a decent economy because look at how much development's happening. But that was the entire point. It was all the guys, which is that very corrupt capitalist thing to do. You know, it's called perception. It's called painting a certain picture. It's called a mask. And so that's basically what they were doing, which is what most capitalist nations have always done. But that was his entire point. He was so egregiously against communism and socialism, true communism and socialism, because just like all the other nations that have been against it, which is all of them in the world, especially the most powerful ones, the reason why they were really against it is because they read it, and they understood what real communism socialism represented, what it really was. It is truly power of the people, not those few, which is what capitalists, oligarchies, and all the rest of the way through the cycle of the world, political cycle of the world, really are and represent. That's who the countries are ran by. So of course they're anti-true socialists and communists, because of the fact that it would literally be in direct opposition to their agendas, their narratives, and how they want to run the world, and how they were already by that point, and are now more than ever. It's literally in such direct opposition, and it would literally take all the power away from them and give it to the common people, and that's a big no-no. You don't fucking do that, because they want to make as much fucking money off of us as possible, because in reality, which is what Ruth in this video with her band actually mentioned as well, it is modern slavery. Slavery was never abolished. It was altered. It was never abolished. It was changed. It was never abolished. It was rebranded. It was rebranded but called abolishment. The reality is that nobody ever escaped slavery. Actually, by that point, by the Industrial Revolution, actually, in the 1700s, that's really when everybody, and I mean everybody, became enslaved. And then it's even more so for longer, literally to the day you die, you have to work, as in be enslaved to the corporations that run the world. It's just modern feudalism. That's why there's a term, neo-feudalism, as in new feudalism. It's just a reformed version of feudalism, and that's a reformed version of slavery. It's modern slavery. Everybody, the feudalism, as in the serfs, the serfdom, common people like you and me, are enslaved to work for the rest of it, for literally from the day we are supposed to be out and living a life on our own to the day we die. We're supposed to work non-fucking stop. And all the money that these companies pay us, they know are pretty much going to be given right back to them anyway. Because they pretty much dominate all the world's production, and thus all the world's output, all the world's sales. So it doesn't matter if it's drink, if it's food, if it's resources, if it's utilities, it doesn't matter. It's a very few amount of elites, global elites, and thus global corporations that really actually own and completely have the market domination over these things. They have the full control, the monopoly. That's it. And so they know that you're working for all their little subsidiaries, all their little brands, all their little companies, all their little monikers, right? You're going to have the psychology of thinking, oh, they're a competitor to these guys. They're actually small. They need my help. No. They own that company. That's a fact. Like, there's very few actual, truly, wholly independent companies, and especially corporations, existing anywhere in the world. And especially if they're dumb enough to go public, they will inevitably be controlled, in part, or eventually hostilely taken over, or fully taken over, non-hostilely, by a corporation. Because of the fact, one of the big global ones. Because that's how they work. They want no real competition. They just want to control the world from us little serfs, us little slaves, all the way up through until themselves. That's really the truth of it. And that's the world we live in. And so, yes, obviously, that's a big thing that true anarchists would really, really want. And maybe some of these other people who claim to be anarchists, that, again, as I said earlier in this video, clearly are not actually anarchists at all because they're contradictory. They're literally saying that they're for one thing which directly opposes the other. if there's one thing that they have in common, it would probably be that. Just like true communists and socialists would still have that same fucking thing in common with the rest of us, which is that you want to fucking change the social systems, sociopolitical systems. You'd want to completely kill it off and rebuild it from scratch so that hopefully it's now in our favor and not in theirs. And maybe you've learned enough from the past and from observance that you know how to shut down all loopholes so that these fuckers can't fucking take it back over in any way again. They can't slither their way like a little deceitful snake in and start manipulating and pulling the strings again until it's back in their favor and they control it all over again. Like, you gotta fucking have reform. That's one of the things that you gotta do. You gotta reform that system, and you gotta reform your own mind, and thus everybody else's mind, hopefully, eventually, sociologically, so that society no longer has this fucking perception of being, or like, really, I guess, the stupidity, this willful blindness to reality, that they are a modern slave. They are a serf. And they're accomplice in it and letting the system and this indoctrination continue because of the fact that they are not standing up against it. They are not willfully allowing themselves to stop being willfully blind and pay attention to the real reality and be like, fuck, you know? Like, we gotta fucking do something about this. If there's anything that most people, in fact, could agree on, that would be one thing where we all have a common value. It's like, that's not okay. We need to change that. We need to stop that. So, yeah, that's a huge thing. And yeah, this is kind of all over the place because there's a lot of correlatives. It's kind of hard to talk about anarchy because, again, kind of like Ruth mentioned, there's not really any, other than its, original definition, I would say, which is, again, a world without rule, governance, or authority. So it's in direct opposition to government, politics, laws, rules, boundaries, limitations, all that shit. It wants to get rid of it. That's the entire point. It's a world without any of it. That's all you really have to define, to understand it with. Beyond that, it's literally, there's nothing there. Because there is no structure, because you've abolished that. So now, it's really left to existential or otherwise. It's just for you to define for yourself. It's for you to put yourself in the shoes of living in a world with true ultimate freedom like that, where there is literally no rules. There's no laws. There's no authorities. There's no governments, politics, boundaries, limitations, anything to stop you from doing anything. And it's therefore for you to flow through and figure out and kind of float through and figure out, okay, how do you feel about it? And now what would you do with yourself? And maybe eventually thus come to a new understanding you're all your own. And at that point, every individual unique living being is going to come up with their own different application, their own different understanding, their own different belief about it, their own different definition for it, description. Because that's the beauty of having no limitations, no boundaries, no laws, rules, anything, is that nobody can tell you what the fuck it really is, how it really works or anything. Because it's up to you to decide how it works for you, how it defines for you, how it sounds and what it means to you, like all of that. That's the beauty of it, because it's true freedom. If you have infinites like that, it's only up to you and your perception and your understanding, what you're choosing to do with it, what it really stands for, what it really is, to you. And I think it's a good thing and a beautiful thing, but it makes it therefore kind of difficult to keep on track with it and describe it beyond just its definition. Because, yeah, like literally it just goes back to exactly what I just said. Now it's up to you to figure out for yourself. It's a fun thing, man. It's great. And obviously in a true anarchy, a world of anarchy, a true one, you're obviously, you can absolutely reach out for help. You can ask somebody to help you or to talk with or whatever. And there's going to inevitably be people out there that are going to be more than happy to do that, with or without expecting something in return. And that's a beautiful thing about that. And just like, you're also going to find just as many, if not even more, people inevitably that they're going to tell you to fuck off. Or look at you funny and be like, why? Why would I help you? I don't even fucking know you, bitch. Get the fuck out of my life, And I think that's actually a great thing, because you never know what to expect. It's just, you it literally forces you to have to live your life fully and thus take your own initiative and do what you want with it. You know, it forces you to have to learn how to rely on yourself and never necessarily expect anything in return or expect people to necessarily help you. But it also, therefore, because it forces you to do that, it means it also forces you to have to be the one to initiate the social behavior and, you know, engage with somebody and see if they're willing to help you with something, if you need help with something or whatever. It's a great thing. Like, you might say, yeah, well, that's kind of already the way it is. Depends on what your perception's like. Like, yeah, in a certain way, yeah, of course, you could absolutely say that you wouldn't necessarily be wrong because that's how you perceive it. But then, if you look at it from a different angle, then you're like, it's similar, it's akin, it's very related, but it's not at all the same. Functionally, it's not remotely the same. It's very, very different. They're separate, you know? So, yeah. And so that's another reason why I don't think that anarchy would ever happen and ever work, is because it terrifies people. Like, anarchy is horrifying to people because of the fact that it's almost, if not literally in reality, anti-human. It's anti-human minded. Like, it's throw out and burn everything in your human mind in fire. Because your human mind is so reliant and so obsessed on the familiarity factor. The only way a human brain can understand and comprehend and believe anything is if it has the familiarity factor. If it has something materially and physically familiar to it. If it can't familiarize itself with it in that way, it'll never accept it, because it will never be able to do anything but reject it instantly, because of the fact that it has no ability to comprehend or understand whatever the hell it is. Because if it can't familiarize itself with it, then it's going to instantly tell you that's impossible and just dismiss it and never think about it again, because it's going to go into crisis. So it knows that it needs to keep you in this little binding prison, this voluntary cage of yours that it has you in at birth, because of the fact that otherwise you're going to lose your fucking mind, because it doesn't understand how to think about anything or comprehend anything or understand anything beyond how it's programmed to. Which is what makes human beings so fucking dumb, because they're so reliant on being human and using what they only have ever known, which is that programming, that wiring of the typical human mind, that they don't know what the fuck to do with themselves when it comes down to anything specifically existential. Because existentialism is innately infinite. It's either nothing or it is infinite. Or maybe it's both. That's the thing with existentialism. That's why existential crises are actually intensely common, because of the fact that existentialism, just like anarchy, is anti-human wiring. It's anti-human brained. It's anti-human minded. It's against and stands against everything that the human mind demands. And so if you can challenge your brain and your mind and say, fuck you, I'm willing to go through a crisis and be deeply confused and really fucking frustrated and overwhelmed and tormented by not being able to comprehend what the fuck I'm dealing with, or I'm looking at, or I'm reading or whatever, you know, so that I'll eventually trust I'll figure it out. Like, I'll break away some of these bars of this cage, step out a little bit, and realize after that my brain's panic is calming down, like, okay, I actually see. I see now. I think I'm fucking starting to grasp that, you know? It's a fun thing. And yeah, comparative to the average person, you know, the average person in society, who, whether it's a family member, friend, colleague, work partner, or stranger, they're gonna look at you like you've lost your fucking mind. Because, again, just like you just were before that event, they're in the same places that you usually were before. They're just a typical human-brained person, relying on their human mind, not realizing that's what's limiting them. That's what's making them so fucking dumb. That's what's making them unable to understand anything beyond the basic human comprehension, is because of the fact that that's all they know. And their brain, again, is programmed to make you feel, all of our brains are made to make us feel absolutely horrified and terrified and panicked and anxious and every negative, overwhelming feeling, emotion, and you know, energy in the book, because it's a self-defense mechanism. It doesn't want to go through a crisis. It doesn't want to overexert itself. It doesn't want to be overwhelmed. It doesn't want to get overworked. And it's going to send you every message it can of panic, of fear, of terror, because, if you start to, step outside the bounds of what shit wants you to. Because then at that point, it's like, but I don't have the ability to comprehend this. Stop. Don't do this. Don't reach your hand. Don't put that fingertip outside of the bars. I swear to God, you're gonna kill us. We're literally going to die in agony. We're gonna be tortured to death if you do this. And the truth is, you're not. Your brain's literally lying to you because it doesn't know what else to do. It doesn't know anything other than itself and how it's always been. So if you try to break outside of that, or you try to even stick a single finger outside of that, it's going to send you into panic mode. It's going to send every panic signal it possibly can. It's going to send you literally all the adrenaline, all the hormones, all the feelings of fight or flight, because it wants you to be so fucking panicked that literally it's going to try to make you feel like literally you're putting your own life under threat if you do not fucking stay in your fucking prison, your cage that your mind is. So you have to break free from that. And, things that are existential at that point will start to slowly but surely make more and more sense to you. You'll start to really understand certain things and realize that's true. And you're going to start to realize it's not actually something to be fearful of. And it's not necessarily going to, eventually it's not going to be overwhelming for you either. And then at the same time, things like anarchy will suddenly make perfect sense because of the fact that, true real anarchy, because of the fact that you realize, but that's true freedom. And now you know what, your freedom, what real freedom feels like as you slowly step further and further away from your cage and slowly start dismantling it. As in taking away the limitation after limitation, boundary after boundary, pushing them out, maybe eventually literally just snapping them in half and throwing them away. Because that's ultimately, in a way, what you're really doing there. And so you're going to become to realize now those two click. They fit perfectly. And then you might start to also understand and think kind of similar to me, where it's like, I bet we were always meant to live like this. We were supposed to live and be in true ultimate freedom with no limitations, no boundaries, no rules, no laws, no authority, no governments, no rule. Because, as in no anything. Because it's true freedom. And now it's up to you to figure out and understand anything on your own and live your life fully. Without any restriction, without holding back, without hesitation, it's a great thing, I think, personally. But it's that panic response and also society and how they perceive it that makes people automatically dismiss you if you're an anarchist or you ever say that, because they're like, oh, well then you must want to rape people, right? You want to fuck kids or something. That's like always the fucking defaults. Like the most angry people with that stuff. It's like obviously you have to want to do something egregiously terrible and immoral because why else would you want to be true freedom and have no restrictions, huh? And it's like, maybe because of the fact I want true freedom. I want to be able to live without having to, scrape by day or have to work until I die or whatever else, just to have a roof over my head or whatever else. Like, maybe that's why. But no, apparently it's because I only want to be a fucking pedophile, apparently. Serial rapist pedophile. Like, sure. Like, no, it can't be anything else. Like, And, so ultimately, it's probably never going to work because I feel like it's inevitable that, yes, eventually, if you had anarchy, real anarchy, anywhere in the world, eventually somebody's going to fucking get that power-hungry attitude again. They're going to say, fuck this, I don't want this. And they're going to go and they're like, I want power. I want control. And they're going to try to brand it in a way that's going to be sensationalist, admittedly, but also a way that's going to make people feel like, yeah, that's a good idea, moral uplift or some bullshit narrative like that, and it's like, it's an inevitability. So like eventually they're going to try to throw themselves back into that cycle again, that typical human cycle, play blind again, and decide to just go through and loop incessantly again with fucking governance, rules, authority, this other stupid shit all over again. And I do find that quite sad. But ultimately, that's also why human beings are obsessed with things like not just government, but another form of government, rules and authority, which is religion. They've always been obsessed with that since that became a first concept. Because, it's for the desperate, empty-souled, broken, hopeful people. Desperate people. To desperately cling to something hopeful of like, oh, I feel like this life isn't enough. I want to believe that there's something more on the other side, whether it's paradise earth or it's heaven or something like that. And it's like, immortality or something, or at least another life. That's why they desperately cling to that. That's really why, because they're actually really sad, depressed people. They literally, most of them do not realize it. They actually lie to themselves thinking they're truly happy because of it. The truth is, nobody who actually sincerely is dedicated to religion is a happy person. They are very sad inside. They don't realize it, but they are. It's a false front for literally themselves first, and then others after that. Of like, oh, look, I'm so happy because I believe in my religion. The truth is, no, you are a very depressive, sad person if you believe in religion, and you're that dedicated and passionate about it. You just don't realize it. Because it takes a very desperate person to want to believe something like that and have those controls on them, because of the fact that they're desperate to want to be seen as a great person. They're desperate to want to be seen as a caring person. They might have a conflict in themselves before they join the religion and become really impassioned with it and preachy, because of the fact that maybe they have the existential crisis of struggling with their humanity of like, am I a good person? Or am I not? Like, I do a lot of this shit, and I'm told to be a good person because of it, and people really appreciate it, and I do help people with this. But then at the same time, I'm also this way, and I say these things, and I do these things, which I'm told by more people that it's actually a bad thing, or that, society seems to indicate that that's not acceptable or whatever, so... Am I a good person or am I a bad person or whatever, Or maybe they're somebody who has addictions. They have addictive personality, they're impulsive, they have struggles like that, right? And maybe they do have depression or something. And so they want social aspects, or they want something, or some reassurance, some crutch, something to brace themselves on and say, this gives me strength to not fall for my impulse, or not go and do something stupid, or not go and try this stupid shit, like try weed, try a drug, try an actual drug, because I don't consider weed drugs, or, try alcohol, or drink a bunch of alcohol, or go to a fucking frat party, or go have, egregious amounts of sex or something. Like, whatever it is that's impulsive for it, or buy a bunch of stupid shit, or make myself go into debt because of whatever that is, whatever it is. And it's like, it's those kind of people that a lot of times will use it as like a crutch. They immediately go and they grab onto it, and they're like, this feels like it gives me some security, some comfort, that I can trust that I'm under control, or I can control myself. That, anytime I'm about to, I feel like I'm about to risk something and do something stupid again, I can go back to this and grab one of my elders, or whatever they're called in your church, or, my parishioner or whatever, and be like, I need help because I feel like I'm about to fucking go do something again, and this is why I came here. And they're like, okay, well, let's read these scriptures, and let's, do a Bible study, and let's really, walk you through this in a religious perspective. Like, that's the point of religion. It's indoctrination. It's a way to reprogram your mind, indoctrinate you, not only to have you controlled, but also to have this idea that it implants in you that you're now an innately good person, and that you want to be a good person, incentivizes you to always do the good thing rather than the bad thing, supposedly, because, that'll make you a good person enough that God will view you in a good light, and will give you paradise, or will give you fucking heaven or whatever else. Or he'll take years off of purgatory or something if you're that kind of belief. And it's just like it's sad to me, because these people really have fooled themselves into believing that they're happy because of their religion, but they're actually sad. That's why they're in religion. They have some sort of a reason that they use it as a support crutch. That's what religion's for. It's a way to keep yourself under control, so to speak, because you don't feel like you can control yourself. You have enough self-control, basically. It's a way for you to feel like you have friends, because now you're around social stimuli. You have these people that supposedly care about you so much. Although technically, if you violate and start going away from the religion, a lot of times those people will suddenly alienate you. As in, they never actually cared about you. They were never actually your friends. That's not what real friendship and real care does. That's not real love does. That's not real compassion is. They don't just go throw you out or try to keep pushing you to come back because, well, they claim it's because, well, you did so well. No, it's actually because of the fact that they're just as indoctrinated as you were to believe that you have to be a part of that, because everything else is false religion. You'll go through purgatory and hell if you're that belief, or you'll just not ever have another life again because you'll just cease when you die because, you were a bad person or something. And it's just like, it's sad because that's part of the indoctrination technique of religion and this cults and politics and government, because they always use the basic human psychology, understanding that emotions and fear are the strongest and easiest way to manipulate a human mind. It's the easiest way to gain control over somebody. You gotta fearmonger, and you gotta pick on the emotions. You gotta trigger them, because if you can do that, then you have power. Then you have control. Then you have divisiveness within that person themselves. You have conflict inside of them. And if you have conflict because it's divided, because the person has been divided up inside of themselves, just like you divide, society at large, you can conquer. It's because the human brain is that fucking stupid. It's that easy to fucking program, rewire, manipulate against that person's will without even those people recognizing that that's what's just happened. They'll actually believe sincerely, hey, I know for a fact that I've done this, that I made my mind up for this, but that's just actually the indoctrination talking, and they don't fucking realize it. It's so sad how easy it is to manipulate somebody. And it's just like, all of this is so fucking related, I feel like. So, yeah, and that's why I mentioned that, is because it's the same reason why people are obsessed with politics. It's the same reason why people are obsessed, therefore, politics meaning government. Rules, laws, and authority. Limitations and boundaries. Controls. All this other stuff. It's because of the fact that they don't know any better, because their human mind is so dominant in them. It's obsessed with that familiarity, and all it knows is imprisonment, voluntary encaging, voluntary enchaining, because of the fact that it wants to keep itself grounded to a specific spot, and it doesn't want to allow itself outside of that bound, because if it does, it's not familiar with it, it can't comprehend it, and therefore it rejects it. It'll go into chaos if you keep yourself outside of the confines of your boundaries, of your box. And so that's why those are related, and that's why I mentioned that too. So it's like, you really do need to free yourself from your human mind, because if you don't, you're screwed, basically. So that's it. Yeah, it's also like any of my political commentaries. This is also kind of like an opinion piece. Another way you can put it is, instead of calling it political commentaries, you can call it from my perspective. From my point of view, because it is, obviously, just like anybody else who does this kind of stuff. So I just wanted to talk about this because, I don't know, it's kind of an important thing to me. There's some things that frustrate with it, like I said, specifically the people that keep conflating things, and because they redefine it, and then they're like, oh yeah, I can be political, anarcho-syndicalist, I can be anarcho-capitalist, I can be blah blah blah, anarcho whatever. You cannot. Also, on this front, I might as well mention it's impossible to be a Marxist. The reason why is because Karl Marx was, number one, he was entirely apolitical his entire life, especially after he output the political cycle of the world. He became the most apolitical he had ever been, and died the most apolitical he had ever been. He's entirely anti-political. Go figure. So that already shows you literally cannot be a political Marxist or a Marxist at all. Number two is the fact that you can't be of somebody else's brain. You cannot be of somebody else's mind, of somebody else's thought. You can mimic and copy a lot of their supposed thoughts, but you cannot be of their thoughts or of their minds. Therefore, again, that's the second reason it's impossible to be a Marxist. Third is the fact that, with those two in mind, and kept in mind for this third one, is the fact that almost everything, if not everything, that people consider to be Marxist in nature doesn't even fit what the fuck the actual real original Communist and Socialist manifestos had said. Because, admittedly, that's what everybody and their dead grandmother in society at large around the world today claims Marxism stands for, is socialism and or communism. Even though, again, he was entirely apolitical. This is why I said the first and second points are very important to keep in mind and keep at the front of your mind and directly correlate with this. Because without these two, this one still would be there, but it would be a lot less more obvious of a reason why Marxism cannot and will never exist and is impossible to be a thing because of that third reason associated with the first two, especially the very first one. Because, again, he was entirely apolitical, so therefore it can't be communist or socialist in nature. And then, again, like I said, this third reason is kind of like a two-part thing, because the other part of the third reason is the fact that it's manipulated. It's controlled, it's violated, it's so intensely different than the actual original communist and socialist manifestos. How they interpret communism and socialism and what they stand for. So fucking different. So, those are the main three reasons why it's impossible to be a Marxist. It's literally impossible. So, nice try. But you're fucking stupid if you believe you're a Marxist, or anybody can be one. You're just dumb. That's a fact. Because you're not acknowledging reality. Admittedly, it's intensely difficult to find and locate the original first print editions of the Communist and Socialist manifestos that have not been degraded, damaged, or altered in some way. A few years ago, I actually found a literal photocopied version. It's an entire website that's literally just the archive of the photocopies of the literal original first edition, first print of the Communist and Socialist manifestos by Karl Marx. Literally from when it was released, the year it was released, so the 1800s, and you can tell. And it's photocopied and then put into this website, both of them, both manifestos. And it's I can't remember how far down it was buried, and I wish I remembered the specific terms I used. It's probably changed to how you access it now. Much like 9/11 archives, there's an entire website that archives all of these experts that study plane crashes, that study demolitions, that study explosives, basically detonations, including wartime detonations of buildings, and thus the other one is, of course, controlled demolitions. All that stupid stuff, and even more, that literally will break down all the main events here in the United States that happened during 9/11. Entire website dedicated to that, totally fucking archive. It's this whole fucking archive, and it's actually still sometimes added to by other people that get interested in it, finally find time, and then go through it, and then, or maybe were so thorough they took years, and finally compiled it, and then sent it in, so that it could be posted there. And it's just this endless archive since then of just like all these experts that show why 9/11 was absolutely a controlled demolition. All the towers were literally controlled demolitions. They were intentionally blown up. And that none of the plane crashes ever happened. Why they were impossible. Each of the crashes literally were impossible. They do not work in any way because that's not how those crashes work. All sorts of stuff like that. That thing was so fucking buried. But I found it even further back. The problem is I don't fucking remember what I searched for that either, and I don't remember how many fucking pages and pages and pages and pages in Google search it was down. But it was super suppressed and buried away. Just like the original Communist and Socialist Manifesto, the website that has the photocopies of those two, which is where I read them. And you can clearly tell it's literally the most different fucking books you will ever see in your lifespan compared to what everybody else in the diagram that says they read the manifestos said. They literally say, everything that they said is entirely different than these first fucking prints. You can tell that this is actually the real deal before any alterations happen to them. It really is the true first print that got released literally the year in the 1800s that he released the manifestos alongside the political cycle of the world. You can blatantly tell that. So, like, two entirely different books. And so, of course, that one's also heavily suppressed and deeply buried. But if you want to take a long time, be really bored, but very attentive and observant, you will probably be able to find that. Might have to do a bunch of different types of searches, which will take a lot longer because you're going to have to go page to page to page to page to page, maybe hundreds of pages down now at this rate. You know, to find either of those things. But it's going to be there. It's just that they're super, well, likelihood is they will be, except it's intensely buried and suppressed because of the fact that they do not want people to see it. And if it's intensely buried and suppressed, then yeah, obviously, like I said, it means they don't want you to see it. But why would it mean that they want you to see it unless it's because it's the real reality? It's the truth. That's the only reason why they do that, is because the people in power do that because they don't want you to know the truth. And that literally means that that exact information is always the factual reality. It is the very truth. That's why they suppress it. That's why they bury it as aggressively as possible. And that's why everything they've said, and everyone else keeps echoing, parroting, including media says, is the opposite of what that says and indicates, is because of the fact they do not want you to know the truth. That's why they suppress it. That's why they say the opposite, because it proves that what they're saying is the lie, and the truth is the thing that they're suppressed and buried. But if you want to go find those two things, you absolutely can. You're welcome to. It's just probably going to take a long time, unfortunately. I wish I was better about fucking saving the damn things. But yeah. And I wish I thought about it back then to record them. You know, even if it's, maybe if I can't do all of them, but like record it on video and stuff like that. Because at least then, that's another medium. So if those websites ever get literally taken down, banned, whatever, blocked, then, or altered, then you actually still have the original state. You have the original real deal. It's still there. People can still see it, you know. Of course, we need more platforms for video than just YouTube and Vimeo and stuff like that, as in Microsoft and Alphabet. But, yeah. So, this is the political commentary of the month. And technically, therefore, this month, December 2021, you get at least 3 videos that technically you could disputably say are political commentary videos. You got the one about nuclear energy. You got the one about U.S. water policy. Now you have this one. You might just get another one. Who knows? Thank you for watching. If you got any value out of this, make sure you leave a like, because it lets me know that you either enjoyed and or got value out of it. And if you, if you do that, not only does it let me know that, which I greatly appreciate, it also lets the YouTube and Google algorithm fully understand and know that you did get value out of it as well. Therefore, inevitably, it's going to mean that other people will as well, and therefore recommend it to more people more often. And also feel free to share it around, of course, as well. And if you hated it, disagreed with it, disliked it, thought I was the biggest fucking lunatic for everything I said, can't stand the way I presented it, that's fair, understandable. But that's what the dislike button's for. So yes, please let me know if that was the case by disliking the video, if that was the case. And if you made it all the way through to basically an hour and a half in, there's a reason why my other channel is named Rambling Mandan. Shut the fuck up. Congratulations. You must also be a masochist like myself. I wouldn't like to consider myself a masochist, but it seems more and more time I must be a masochist and not realize it. So congratulations. We're masochists together. And I'll see you probably never in whatever the next video is. There you go. Also, if you want something more lighthearted and fun, and still laid back and casual though, and not so serious, check out my 7 Days to Die Season 2. As in 7 Days to Die in Alpha 20 series I'm doing with my brother Mario and his roommate and our basically, not actually brother, but long lost brother, Randy. See you around. Stay safe out there. And have a great day or night wherever you are. Goodbye.